morning, everyone. I just want to welcome Valley. My name is Laura Stickle. This is my first time welcoming everyone, so this is extra special. So I just want to say I'm glad that you chose Sun Valley today, and we want to welcome our friends that are online watching, and I just hope that you all gain a blessing from this service.
Hi everyone. So before we start worship, we're just going to begin with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this lovely sunny day. Thank you that everyone is here safely, and let's just open our hearts and open our minds to the worship and the discussion we're going to have today, and we just ask that you be here with us. Amen.
Surrender. worship here at Sun Valley is by giving back through our tithes and through our offering. We believe that God has been so tremendously generous to us, that he has blessed us beyond belief, that the reason that we can sing "It Is Well" with our soul is because God has been good to us. And so one of the ways we worship, again, is by giving back through our tithes and through our offerings to support the ministries that we have here in this community and at this church. And so there are a few ways that you can give with us. You can give either online through adventistgiving.ca. You can give through in-person cash or check donations through our tithe envelopes. And something that we're very proud to have as well is our Square app. And so this is going to be available for you at the very end of our service in the foyer. And this you can give through debit or through credit card in case you forget checks or cash like myself. And you can give through debit or credit cards as well. So we're just going to invite our ushers to come on forward and have a word of prayer over the offerings that we present to God. So let's just bow our heads. God, we want to thank you so much for being so amazing, for loving us recklessly, without boundaries, without limits, without condition. And so, God, we give back to you through our tithes and through our offerings to worship, to honor, and to praise your name for all that you've done and for all that you are, God. So we just pray that you would bless these offerings, that would go a long way towards supporting the ministries that we have here in this community. Thank you again. Amen.
us. And thank you that we're all here today to be able to worship you together. And please open our hearts and minds to our discussion today and give us peace and understanding. Amen.
All right, at this time we're going to welcome our children to go to their classes. So there's the youngest children's classes in the fellowship hall, that's 12 and under, and then the older children are 13 up in the boardroom. And now we'll welcome up Abraham and our other special speakers today.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. If you haven't been aware of what we're going through a very special series this week, and today we're going to be reading through all of these books together. No, I'm just kidding. I want to invite on James and Fran to come on up and join me. Again, if you haven't been here for the past couple of weeks, if your first time joining us, or if you've missed the past couple of weeks, we've been going through a series called our Mingling of Souls series. And so this series, we've been dealing with some very heavy topics that sometimes we don't deal with at church. And we've been dealing with sex, marriage, and relationships. And so we've been going through our series throughout this week, or throughout the past couple of weeks, for the past 5 months, I think it was. And we just finished last week with our final sermon. And so we wanted to do something special for our very final presentation on the Mingling of Souls. And we're doing something which we're calling our panel discussion. And if you see up on the screen, I might actually stand the whole time. I'm not really sure if I want to sit. But if you see up on our screen, we have our Worship Wednesday post. If you have Instagram and you like going on Instagram, you can follow us at Sun Valley Fellowship. And every Wednesday, we post a Worship Wednesday with a small devotional and a topic or a verse pertaining to what we're discussing. And for this week, we decided to do Proverbs 15:22, where it talks about with many counselors, or with few counselors, plans may fail, but with many advisors, plans succeed. And so we just thought, when wisdom comes through community. Wisdom comes through community. And so we thought it'd be a great idea to have members of our community here, Fran and James, to join us as we tackle some of your questions. Throughout our series, we've been inviting questions to be sent through anonymously through menti.com, and as well to be submitted through our anonymous box at the back. And we got some of these questions, and so we are going to be kind of tackling some of them and seeing what we kind of come up with collectively. We met together throughout this week, and we prayed about it, and we looked over all the questions, and we asked God to guide us as we opened up this discussion today. And I want to give a couple of disclaimers before we open up with prayer. Our first disclaimer is that as much as we would love to tackle every single question that came in, we won't have the time to deal with every single question. So some of the questions we combined, if they had similar ideas, some of the questions we combined to kind of get the idea, or some questions we just might not be able to get to because it is not our field of expertise, and we are kind of out of our depth with that question, or because we won't have the time to tackle it in the time we've been given. And so we just wanted to kind of give that disclaimer. We also wanted to give a couple more disclaimers. If we ever talk about the word submission, which we preached about on our last week's sermon when we talked about Ephesians chapter 5, submission. When we talk about submission, it's a mutual submission. You have to understand that we're not talking about one gender submitting to another, and that it's a domineering relationship. Whenever we talk about submission, we're talking about a mutual submission where both partners are giving of themselves to the other, where there's an equal balance in a relationship, a godly relationship that respects the other partner in the relationship. Whenever we use specific gender pronouns like women or men, we are speaking in general terms. We said we know that it's not going to be indicative of the truth for everyone. We know that everyone's experience is different, and when we speak in general terms, we're not trying to kind of paint everyone with a broad brush, but we're just kind of doing that for the ease of the conversation. And so whenever we talk about women or men, those are easily interchangeable, and so we just want to make that aware for you, that we don't mean specific things to specific genders. We're talking about them interchangeably, but we just use it in a general term because that's the way that the world generally understands it. And I think those are the only disclaimers we talked about, right? So we just want to open up with a word of prayer quickly before we get started. Let's bow our heads. God, I want to thank you so much for this day that you've given us. Thank you for this opportunity to gather together and to discuss your word and to discuss some questions about marriage, relationships, and sex. And so we just pray, God, that you would bless us and that you would guide our words, that you would make them your words and not just ours. And so we invite your Holy Spirit here. Amen. Amen. So our first question is if God wants us to love, get married, and have sex, what happens when we get to heaven? Will we still enjoy marriage and sex with our spouse? Great question.
Very often asked.
Yeah.
And debated.
Including our debate we had earlier this week.
Yes, we had a debate. Yeah, we have even amongst here ourselves in the panel, we have a difference of opinions as to what this kind of means. Some of us stick to the idea that we won't have marriage and sex in heaven, that it won't be that same kind of thing that we have now. Some of us believe that it'll be, and it may be different. We distinguish the heaven and the new earth when it comes to God, Jesus speaking about the resurrection and how there won't be giving in marriage. But I think what we came to, the conclusion that we kind of came to, and something that we read, James and I shared this, we read in Ellen White's book, I think it was Mar.10.18. She talks about how there are a lot of things about heaven and about the new earth that we won't really be aware of, that we don't know what it's going to be like, that the Bible isn't always concerned with the nitty-gritty details of what that's going to be like. The Bible is mostly concerned with us getting there, right? The Bible is concerned with telling us that we have a loving God and Savior who just cares for us deeply and who sacrifices his life for us and wants us to experience relationship with him. And so it doesn't go into a lot of detail sometimes, or it may be confusing, but we kind of concluded that that we believe that God is a loving, fair, and righteous God, and that God has never given us anything that is not for our benefit. That if God asks us to surrender something, that he will always give us something better, a million times better than whatever we are surrendering. And so we kind of concluded that whether or not there is marriage in heaven, if there isn't marriage in heaven, if there isn't sex in heaven, that's because God has something far greater and far better for us. And if there is marriage and if there is sex in heaven, then it's still going to be far better and far greater than what we experience here. It may not even be the similar system we have here. It may be completely different in heaven. But we kind of talked about that. The real important part to focus on isn't what heaven's going to be like, but in kind of spreading the gospel and helping others get there in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, Paul talks about how it's going to be better than we can imagine.
Yes.
And Ellen White takes it a step further and even says, there are no words in the English language that can even describe heaven. I mean, that's how amazing and mind-blowing it's going to be. So whatever our best image of marriage is on earth, it's going to be, we can't even imagine it. It's going to be that much better in heaven, the relationships that we're going to be in.
There's so many things about heaven that are a mystery to us, and there's no real easy answers. And I think we just have to be excited that it is going to be better than whatever we could imagine.
Yeah, I think the important part is trusting God that whatever we give up or whatever he has for us is always going to be better than what we have here.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of what that looks like. Question 2 we had is, at what point is it considered cheating on your partner? Great question.
Yeah, as a woman, the answer is anything that looks lustful, pornography, all those kinds of things break a woman's heart, just as if you cheated on them. So I would think it's, if you don't cherish your partner and want to be faithful to them and loyal, that all those things that today's culture has really, really magnified it with our technology and everything. Years ago, the men had to sneak a Playboy magazine, right? Now they just go any website and find what they're looking for. So, yeah, to me, that's how I feel it as a woman, that it's right from the beginning. Even staring at some other woman in the same room and you can sort of see them fantasizing, that hurts. Because we want to be loved and cherished. And I think as a woman, well, maybe not after James told me something. I was going to say women don't seem to do the same as men, but this fellow here told me this week that 50% of the women are cheating now. And
Yeah.
I just couldn't quite imagine it.
The statistics are really changing. In fact, the demographics for the earlier generation of women shows that more women are cheating than men. on the early age group, the 18 to 25 range. And then it sort of goes back up to the norm, which are more men cheat and less women. But the demographics are changing. The world is changing, and we want to be on guard for that. And it's the same for pornography. It used to be predominantly men. I think they used to say 90% of men, right, for the longest time. Now that's really changing. A lot of women are starting to struggle with pornography as well. So, I mean, the secular world in counseling, you're going to find all kinds of
Situations.
unbiblical advice
Yeah.
for what to do. But Christian counseling always has maintained if it's an impure thought, it's not right. It's wrong. You want to guard your mind.
So the relationship with Christ is foremost, because if you're very intimate with Jesus, he's going to help you with those, and you'll grow closer to him rather than grow closer to the addiction or whatever it is that's grabbing you. So I really believe that that's the answer. Marriage takes three. Takes three. It takes Christ in your marriage, and being able to talk and communicate, and I guess that's another question I should wait for.
Yeah, we talked about this in our last week's sermon. We talked about that marriage isn't just a husband and wife. That marriage is a trifold as well relationship, where it's God inside your marriage. And if you don't have God inside your marriage or relationship, then the relationship becomes a lot less successful and a lot less beneficial. I would even dare to say it. And we also talked about this in our sermon series, The Spark of the Divine. In our second part of our series, we talked about where Jesus talks about if anyone even just looks at a woman lustfully, or a man, right? If anyone looks at another person lustfully and desires after them in their heart, that is still part of cheating. It's about fantasizing and wanting something that isn't yours to fantasize and want to have, right? Because I think a lot of the time the world kind of emphasizes you can look but you can't touch, but that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, no, it's like looking is also a part of it. Because it formulates thoughts, it formulates behaviors, it formulates patterns.
Temptation.
And it's about trying to get rid of the temptation and removing that so that you can be faithful to your partner. Yeah. Question 3 we asked is, what is an ideal relationship according to the Bible? What is an ideal relationship according to the Bible?
I guess it's the same as we just spoke of, that you both have a relationship with Christ and you work together on that relationship with Christ involved. And prayer is a big issue between a married couple. To pray together really helps, because sometimes you can bring out something with your eyes closed that you wouldn't dare say if you're looking at your spouse. And we've done that quite often. And then we talk about it after. So yeah, I think that that's the ideal relationship, letting Christ be in both your hearts.
Are we supposed to be actively looking for a spouse or waiting on God to bring a spouse to us?
I think it goes both ways. You're sort of looking, but you want to look for a Christian husband. And I have a little story about that. Gordon tells me he was praying 3 years for a Christian wife. And what happened to me was I was going to the Adventist church, and I was hearing all these beautiful sermons about Christ's love for me. And I got to the point where I was very inspired that the relationship I was in wasn't healthy. But I was having a really hard time letting go of it, because I think I was in love with love, not the person. I realized that years later. But anyway, what happened to me, which is kind of interesting, is that I left a sermon, and I was feeling so touched by God that I was driving my car, and I came to a red light, and I said, okay, God, it's him or you. And then as the green came on, I said, it's you, God. And from there on, I was so happy and was able to let go of that relationship. And it was a miracle in my life. So, but we were actively looking for a Christian man for me, between my sister and a few other people in the church. And someone said, there's a new teacher in Halifax, and he's tall, and he's, what did they say that word? He's
Dark and handsome?
dark and, no, they said tall, dark, and they left the other one out. But I have found him to be a very handsome, loving man.
There you go.
But they were teasing me. But anyway, it did work out well for us, because we were both searching for someone that we could share Christ with and read the Bible together and pray together. So I really believe God has led us through all these years because of that decision that we both made. So,
Yeah, I also believe that a big part of finding the right person or finding kind of who God has for you. I don't believe that there's just a one person. I don't believe in a kind of one person only kind of thing, where it's just like if you miss the chance, then you're gone for the rest of your life and you can never find anyone else.
Soulmate.
So yeah, I don't believe in a soulmate. That's exactly monogamy. I believe in case that.
I was getting a little worried.
No, monogamy, 100%. But I don't believe in soulmates, right? I believe in the power of choice, the power of choosing to love someone, despite frustrations, despite difficulties. You choose to love that person, right? You choose to be in that relationship. And I think a big part of kind of finding your spouse and your godly spouse is preparing yourself. Right? If
Yes.
God has a spouse for you, and if God has someone godly for you, but you're not in the place to receive that godly person, then God's not going to bring them over to you. You know, I think part of kind of the waiting aspect. I think you should be actively looking, right? Looking for a godly person to enter into your life, and I think your friends and your family can definitely help there. But I think another part of waiting then is also kind of preparing your own heart and finding your relationship with God and being ready, because you don't just want the person God has for you. You also want to be the person God has for them.
That's right.
And I think it's important.
And I
part.
think the other important thing too is to give it over to God, that if it's willing, if he's wanting me to be single the rest of my life, then I'm willing to take that. I kind of discovered that through my whole life in different situations, and that is the fact that it's God's will, not ours. So no matter how much we want it, we have to give it over to him, and that's difficult to do, but it really is wonderful when you do.
Yeah, the minute you stop looking,
Yeah.
that's when you find someone.
Yeah.
Right. That's why before I found my lovely person, I was giving up all the time. God, I'm done.
Yeah.
You're allergic, you know. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I think a big part of that, right, is preparing yourself, preparing your own heart, and also having godly counsel that can direct you in the right direction. And if there's a handsome teacher out in Halifax, then that means pursuing that as well, right? And then the next kind of part of that question is, what should we do if we aren't happy in a relationship?
I think we've all experienced that, probably through our marriages, because there are times that things happen, and there's disappointments, and there's crisis, there's stress, you know. I found in my personal life that the best way was for me to bring it to God and just trust him and pray and just get more intimate with Jesus. And I used to pray, please help me to love my husband, help me to show love when I didn't feel love, you know. So, yeah, it's all got to do with the relation. It always goes back to the relationship you have with Christ, because he's the one that's got all the answers.
Yeah, I know this specific question came from a younger person, and so
Okay.
that wasn't married. And so I think there's a distinction to be made between
and
what you do in a married relationship
Yes.
versus what you do in a dating relationship.
And yeah, I think it's also God again, though, because in my relationship I wasn't happy, 5-year relationship, and I wasn't happy, but God gave me the power to let it go, you know.
Yeah.
So I think when you are in a relationship and you can just feel the vibe that it's not going to work, but you don't want to give it up, that God's the only one that can help you give it up. It's
Yeah, I mean, the text we just threw up from Proverbs, a wise man has many counselors. I mean, that's when you take it to somebody, either professionals or a pastor or really good friends that you trust, that they have really good fruit on their tree and good biblical understanding of relationships. That's when you bring some of those issues to friends. And, you know, I've connected with a lot of counselors over the years, and then you run into one and pose a question, and they just come from it from a completely different perspective, and the window's just open. You're like, oh my goodness, I never even thought of that. That's for sure, right? So I mean, that's why the Bible suggests you have many biblical counselors in your life. Just good, general, level-headed people.
Yeah, we also want to, because the next question is important too, we also want to distinguish what the difference between not being happy in a relationship versus being in an abusive relationship.
Right.
Those are two very different things, right? We do not condone sticking in a relationship that is abusive just because you feel like, oh, I can't give up on the relationship, or divorce is a bad thing, or whatever the case is. We do not condone abusive relationships, and we do not condone staying in an abusive relationship as well. We strongly suggest that if you are in an abusive relationship, that you reach out to your support system, that you reach out either to your family, to your church community, to counselors as well, to inform them of the situation and to achieve or receive help on how to exit the abusive relationship, because those are very hard things to do, because the next question is, why won't people usually leave an abusive relationship? I think, James, you had a couple things to say about that, right?
Well, I mean, there's lots of reasons, right? There can be financial control, there can be control and manipulation through the kids, there can be emotional threats, physical violence threats. I mean, the list is endless. What we do know is that for a person to leave an abusive relationship, on average, takes about 7 times. And what that suggests through research is that there's a bit of a process that needs to happen with that person, coming to terms with things, getting independence, getting good biblical counsel. Just there's a lot of things that need to happen. But for sure, you know, as we've been talking about this sermon series, and as we've been talking about meeting your partner's needs and making sure that, you know, you're making them happy and they're making you happy, it's a reciprocal process. Mm-hmm. It's not, you know, oh, I have to please my partner again. No, it needs to be reciprocal, constantly be looking at that. But by no means is that the same for someone that's being abused. That completely changes things. So abuse, I mean, honestly, there were probably 4 or 5 sermons out of these questions. They're bigger questions for another date.
Could you define abuse, please?
Oh, Fran. This is going to be as varied as there's probably 7 billion different interpretations of abuse, right? Clearly, if there's physical violence, we would all understand what that is. Emotional abuse is not, you called me dummy, because I've actually heard, you know, just in one instant, that's not abuse, right? It has to be a consistent, systematic, 6 months, I think is a psychological, what they look for in the DSM, 6 months of habitual abuse of some kind.
What about control? Like, I just looked it up in the dictionary, and it said the abuse of privilege is improper treatment by speaking harshly, insulting. That's more of a lighter type of abuse, but it's still hard to live with.
Yeah, and again, that's when, you know, you want to get some professional help. Go see a counselor. Go see a couple counselors. Honestly, shop. They're like a good doctor or a good mechanic. It takes a while to find one that really connects with you, and that is not there to just make you feel good, but that can also push you a little bit and challenge you a little bit. There are so many great strategies, great books, great YouTube videos on how to improve a marriage. There's some fantastic Christian counselors online. Pastors, I would honestly just start to do some research. It's completely different than it was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, you had to go look hard to find this stuff. Right now, it's accessible right at your keyboard, right? So there's a lot of great strategies and great ideas on how to improve a relationship if things are starting to get a little wonky.
And I think for the children, it's really important that you take care of it, because the children, especially like you say, years ago, they didn't know what to do or where to go. But we have so many resources now. Yep. But one adult woman said to me once, I couldn't understand why my mom was standing there. I could see her legs on the floor. I was on the floor and Dad was beating me, and she didn't do a thing for me. And she really hated her mom more than she did her dad because she didn't do anything. But today it's different. We can step out. There's resources, right?
Yeah. Again, distinguishing the difference between an unhappy and an abusive relationship. If you're in an unhappy relationship that is just unhappy for a variety of reasons, we suggest seeking counseling, seeing a couples counselor. But if it is an abusive relationship, and we talk about abuse comes in a variety of different forms. It comes through physical, emotional, mental abuse. Spiritual abuse is also a thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, that people use spirituality to put others down or to control other people. And if you're in a situation that is like that is an abusive relationship, you need to seek help in getting out of that relationship. We do not condone putting up with a relationship. I know I'm going through a class. Actually, I just finished a class this week on it's called an End It Now class on kind of dealing with sexual abuse and preventing sexual abuse between spouses, and specifically as well with children, and protecting the church, and kind of making good policies to kind of protect the children in our churches from sexual abuse and all that other kind of stuff. And it talks about how there are some people that just think, they quote these Bible verses like, God will never give you any more than you can handle, or God will bring you through it, or God's going to bring something beautiful out of it. Yeah, those things are true, but at the same time, if it is an abusive relationship, God does not want you to stay in that abusive relationship by any means whatsoever. God wants you to leave that relationship. If it is an abusive and unhealthy relationship, you need to seek help in exiting that relationship, because it's not a godly relationship.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, the Bible says, leave no stone unturned, right? So you want to explore every possible scenario, every possible way of getting help. But if all those avenues don't prove to be fruitful, then yeah.
Get help first.
Yeah, and the next question, how do I incorporate God and spiritual aspects into a healthy relationship? Books are a huge thing. I like reading books. I don't like reading physical books as much as I like absorbing knowledge. But books are a fantastic resource for going through with couples. I brought a couple of books that I really enjoyed. For example, I based my series off of this significantly, The Mingling of Souls, by Matt Chandler. It's God's design for love, marriage, sex, and redemption. A fantastic book. It goes through the entire Song of Solomon, and it views Song of Solomon from dating to marriage to into old age life, and kind of gives you some practical steps and advice on how to have a healthy relationship in marriage. We have another book that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, The 5 Love Languages, right? This is a great book on practical steps on how to help your marriage. But this also helps with the spiritual aspects of your marriage as well, right? With improving your spirituality. This is a fantastic book, The 5 Love Languages.
That's actually in my top 3 that I recommend for marriages, inside and outside of the secular Christian world. There's 5 languages for children and teens, and
yeah, there's a couple of other different versions of the love language as well, like love languages, or the apology, forgiveness languages, I think. There's something like that. This is another great book that I really like, by Francis and Lisa Chan. I read this in preparation for our sermon series as well. It's called You and Me Forever, Marriage in the Light of Eternity. And this is a fantastic book by the couple, which is really cool, because sometimes you see just one person, but this is both Francis and Lisa Chan, the couple, and they talk about kind of having a godly marriage and how to incorporate God into your marriage. And if you're really looking for incorporating spiritual aspects into a healthy marriage, You and Me Forever, by Francis and Lisa Chan, is a fantastic resource. I like it because every chapter ends with some practical workshop steps that you can take as a couple, which is a great thing. And I recommend just reading it slowly, reading a couple pages a day, or reading a chapter a day, or whatever the case is, together before you go to bed. Or typically before you go to bed, I think is an easier thing to do than in the morning. But including personal devotions in your life, maybe taking a 30-minute chunk out of your day before, wake up a little earlier and have prayer together. Something as simple as praying together is an incredible thing that brings a relationship closer and brings God into it that very few other things can do.
Good point.
Yeah. Our fourth question. We have a lot of questions here, and like I said, we might not even get through them all, but we're going to try to get through as many as we can. The question writes as like this: how do you educate men to understand that if they so desire to control, the best way to control is not to control? And they kind of add the note: women automatically in their nature want to share and be open to a partner that does not demand his own way.
there's a problem inherent in the question, unfortunately, which is the challenge of control. Control not to control. It's an interesting way of phrasing it. I mean, you don't ever want control to be in a relationship in any way. It needs to be reciprocal. It needs to be mutual. You know, we recommend often, you know, honey, is there anything, is that okay if I do that,
Yes,
Fran?
dear.
Okay. You know,
Oh, yes, let's do patella to patella.
oh, there you go.
Okay?
Yeah, they talked about this thing called patella to patella, this marriage technique when you speak to your spouse, you sit literally knee to knee, touching each other, look into each other's eye, and communicate whatever is important to the other.
Honey, is there anything that you need to hear from me? Is there anything that you haven't heard from a while that would really make a difference? Is there anything I can do for you?
You're asking me too many questions at once.
Sorry, dear.
The first thing is stop asking so many questions at once, one at a time.
Yeah, I need you. I need you to be more understanding of where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Because I'm totally different than you are. And so I can't be like you all the time and say the things you want me to say or do what you want me to do.
Are there any needs of yours that you feel are unmet?
Yes, I think it would be great if you could spend more quality time with the children and put away your phone and just lock it in a box or something for an hour and talk to us eye to eye. The children really miss you because you're so busy with your work and you're so involved when you get home with the TV or your phone.
Is there anything that I can do for you to serve you in some way that would really make a big difference right
Oh,
now?
wouldn't it be great if you'd vacuum every week for me? That would take something off my mind. Or maybe even cook a meal or bring a meal home some night.
I'm catching a bit of a theme here.
Let's notice something very important here, because this is a tendency, we have a tendency to want to defend ourselves whenever we feel like are being attacked personally, or whenever we feel like someone is criticizing us, we want to defend ourselves. And so, for example, in this scenario, if your wife says, I'd love if you could just vacuum once a week, your job isn't to say, I vacuum once a week, or I do cook, or your job isn't to defend yourself. Your job is to, as a partner, your job is to listen to the felt needs of your other partner and to meet those. Even if you feel like you are meeting those, then that means that your partner doesn't feel like you're meeting those. And so your job then as a partner is to continue to work on that, not to defend yourself, not to criticize, or not to bash the other person, but to work on those felt needs and do that. Yeah, big time.
One thing that Gordon and I learned years ago, which has been really helpful in our marriage, is get away at least every 3 months just by yourselves. Go to a motel, even if it's in the same city. Get someone to keep your kids and just talk like that. And just spend time together, walk together, read the Bible together, pray together, love each other. And just, we come back re-energized. It really has worked for us through the years, especially when our kids were small. Because you're so tired emotionally, physically and mentally as a mom, plus dad's working all the time. So it's been a real plus for us.
Yeah, the important part we want to mention too is that we shouldn't want to control in our relationship. Our relationship has to be mutual. It has to be reciprocal. Yeah. It has to have this give and take between the other, and it cannot be a one-sided controlling relationship. And guys or women too, whatever the case is, if you are seeking to control your partner or your spouse, then that is the wrong mentality to be entering into the relationship with.
Yes, and a comment was made by the women that said the recurring issues that came up seems to be that men like to be and feel like it's their right to control their wives and even their children. And the forcefulness in which they often use causes women to back down and feel resentful, but comply for the sake of harmony in the home. So some women have to walk on eggshells to sort of prevent from her husband blowing up or being too hard on the children.
If that's the case, again, we recommend two things we want to recommend constantly. Throughout every question we discussed, we recommended two things. Always seek counseling. Always seek help from other people, because there's going to be a wealth of knowledge that you might not have as a couple that other people may have, that other counselors may have. And the other thing is communication is so key in a relationship. You have to communicate to each other. You have to express to each other your felt needs and your wants and what you feel may not be being met. Right, because that is important. We cannot have resentment in a relationship. Resentment creates unhealthy relationships.
Mistakes are going to be made.
Yes, there's no perfect.
Count on that, but it's how you resolve them and how fast you can resolve them. Mm-hmm. That's a key.
That's right.
Yeah. Question number 5 says, my wife or my husband chats all the time, even when I'm watching my favorite show. What can I do instead of putting her in a bad mood by grumbling about it? Turn off the TV. How important is your show versus your relationship?
It doesn't get turned off.
It doesn't get turned off, right? I'd like to say that.
It gets muted sometimes, but not turned off. No, wouldn't be fair to the men. They've got to watch their shows.
See, for me, it's so easy to turn it off because I never watch actual live TV. It's all either on Netflix or computer, right? So I just pause it. I'm just like pause. Yeah. Yes. You know, and that's a great tool to have. But I think one of the important things is a relationship is so important, right? And you can, at least in my opinion, Unless you're not technology savvy, then I can help you with that. But I feel like there is no excuse for saying, like, I can't listen to you, my TV show's on, because every TV show is available online later anyways. And so even if you miss it, you can go back later and watch it later. It's not going to kill you.
But somebody might tell you the score.
Yeah, that's true too.
There's an issue, though, that's inherent inside the question, and that is that one person is trying to communicate while the other is trying to tune out. What that implies is that there's an unmet need of being heard and listened to. So clearly, the first step is turn off the TV, but more importantly is to have that quality one-on-one communicating, listening time. We really struggled at one point, Corinne and I, with one of our kids. It just seemed like there was a lot of demanding, a lot of leeching and hanging on and demanding. And when we read this book, we realized that their needs were not being met as much as we thought they were. And so all it took was for me to stop what I was doing, to put on my lap, so that's physical touch. Hi, honey, how are you? I've been thinking about you today. You are so adorable. I love when you do this, and I love this about you. So that's words of affirmation. I got something for you. It's a gift, and you give them a big hug and kiss, and that's the gift of gifts, the love language of gifts. Is there anything I can do for you? So that's the act of service. And you just sort of go through some of the 5 love languages, and it's amazing that in 10 seconds, we didn't see any of that hanging on and desperation for time. And all it took was a deliberate time to communicate and meet those needs. And it's interesting how we didn't see that behavior anymore after that. It had to be specifically meeting the person's needs.
Yeah, a big help might be setting a chunk of time aside at the end of the day or in the middle of the day or whenever you can to kind of drown out all other noise, put away the phone, put away the TV, and to communicate. I know one of the things that I like to do personally is, for example, if I'm away from Melissa for a very long time, for example, like this mission trip that is coming up, I'm going to be away for 2 weeks, and the likelihood of me being able to talk to her every day is not going to be very high. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm away for a long time and I don't get to talk to her and kind of tell her about my day is everything interesting that happens, I write it down. And then when I come back, then I have this whole list of things that I can talk about, and I can dump 30,000 stories on her in the sand. But I love to do that. I love to write down, because I love to tell her about my day. I love to tell her about what's going on, the interesting things that happen, the funny stories that happen to me. And I also tend to forget very easily, so I have to write them down. So I can, at the end of the day, remember, or I'll text her if throughout the day it's like, remind me to tell you this story later, because the text doesn't do it justice, or whatever the case is, right? I just setting aside a chunk of time to communicate and to spend time together in communication is very, very important. Yeah. Well, question number 6 is, I work hard to provide for my family. Why doesn't my wife appreciate it more?
Your wife works very hard to provide for your family. Why don't you appreciate her more? I mean, you could spin the table very easily on that. The point is, we need to appreciate each other, period. No matter what the roles, no matter what we do, appreciate the person you're in a relationship. And it doesn't even have to be in your marriage. It can be with extended family or close family or siblings or spouse or whoever. I mean, just appreciate each other more, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, Fran, we talked about this too, right? Where there's sometimes where a husband may feel like, or a wife or whatever, we're kind of interchangeable there, where a partner may feel like they're providing and are not feeling appreciated, but maybe the other family is feeling maybe you're just working too hard. Maybe your feeling is that, oh, I'm here working hard day in, day out, I'm working late hours to provide for my family, when all your family really wants is that time and quality time with you, instead of just a big paycheck at the end of the month.
Yeah, the workaholism is a really serious addiction, really, because if you feel like you have to be going and doing all the time, you're losing a whole bunch of time with your family. So it's a very difficult situation when there's children and the spouse that's doing all the work at home. So it can be really hard.
Yeah, question 7 says, why do men cheat? Is it because they feel like it is their right to get sex whenever they want it, and if their needs are not being met, they feel like it's their partner's fault? Is it because they feel like the wives are not giving them their due diligence and don't comply with their demands?
Unmet needs. I mean, communicate with each other more. We can't stress this enough, and we don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over again, but talk to your spouse, talk to your partner, talk to people that you love in your life, and just see, is there anything I can do for you that would make a big difference? Is there anything, any need of yours that feels unmet right now?
That was so good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about how sex isn't, a lot of the times people think that cheating is just for sex. But the reality is that the majority of affairs aren't for sex. They aren't just for the unmet need of sex. Affairs usually start with an emotional connection or a personal connection or some unmet need that is not being met that then leads into sex. Sex isn't just an individual act. It's the culmination of an emotional connection between two people. We talked about that. That's important. And I remember Pamela and Claudio Consuegra, when they were giving us pastors the marriage talk, they talked about, they told us in explicit detail, and I'm going to tell you guys in explicit detail as well. If you don't feel comfortable hearing this, you're welcome to leave the room, or you're welcome to raise your hand, and I will stop at any point in time. But they taught us how to have foreplay. And so I'm going to go into explicit detail as well. So if you feel uncomfortable, please raise your hand and I will stop immediately. And so Pamela and Claudio starts by saying, foreplay begins in the morning. It says, as a guy, you wake up and you kind of do the bed. You make sure that it's not just thrown, the covers aren't just thrown everywhere. You make the bed nice and tidy. And then you get up and then you make breakfast for your wife. You don't let her make breakfast for you, you make breakfast for her. And when you come home and when she's doing the dishes, you go up from behind her and you give her a nice hug and a kiss on the cheek and you tell her, honey, I can do the dishes. I'll finish those for you. And you also say, honey, if you'd like, I will vacuum today and I'll fold the laundry. And when you come home, and throughout the day as well, you text her nice little text, honey, I love you.
This is not realistic. I
So
think you're
much.
exaggerating too.
But this is how foreplay is supposed to be. So, honey, I love you so much. I appreciate you. You look beautiful today. And compliments throughout the day, the acts of service throughout the day. And then he says, and when you get home, your wife will be more receptive towards having sex. And then he says, and then for women, this is how you can perform foreplay for your man. Walk in the door. You just be present. And that's it. That gets a man ready to go. But we talk about that. The important thing is this, is that sex isn't just an individual act. It is the culmination of emotions and relationship and connection. And a lot of affairs, of course, there are a few affairs that are, I think, are for pure sex and that can constitute kind of sexual addiction, and those exist. But I think the majority of the affairs, and I think the stats will prove this as well, the majority of affairs do not just start with sex. They start with an emotional connection that they may not be feeling met in their home, and then it leads then into the culmination and the act of sex. And that's why we believe it is so important to communicate with your spouse, to have that emotional connection, to have that relationship with each other, to prevent that, because it's not just going to be about sex.
And I think we have to realize, too, the way we've been brought up has a large part to play in reactions we have with each other when it comes to sex. And especially for men who've watched their dad, with their Playboy magazines or whatever, watching dirty porn or whatever. Kids growing up today, it's so sad because they see a lot of stuff that we wouldn't have seen as kids. And they hear a lot. So I think that's important for a man to ask himself, why am I doing this? Why am I, having these, wanting to have sex with somebody else or whatever it is? They need to sort of go back into their history and just see, because it does say that, doesn't it, in the Bible, that from generation to generation. And it does seem to prove true that a person that's been having trouble, or even all the struggles that kids had as children, like the women that have been abused as children, it's very hard for us to give of our whole selves if we don't really feel the love and trust from the man that we've married. So I think it's really important that that's something that we delve into when we get help, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and question 8, when trust, either by cheating, controlling, or emotional abuse has caused such a disastrous injury, how does a woman, or a man as well, how does a person heal and move forward in such a relationship?
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what we're saying, isn't it? Because it could be from childhood, teenage years, and just don't trust men. So then you find somebody you think you could get married to, and then you have all these problems because of what happened to you before. So, and then if it's happening during your marriage, that's even worse, right? It's disastrous too.
Yeah, I mean, I think Don Straub's done a great job of talking about healing in relationships over the years. There's a lot of sermons online that you can easily access. But again, you know, we want to be very careful and be very clear that that when it comes to abuse, make sure that you're working on it. You know, people will come into my office and for 20, 30 years, they haven't worked on the abuse that's happened to them. And, you know, my heart breaks because I know that they've been robbed of 20 to 30 years of great joy that they could have fully experienced in life, whereas they've held back a little bit on certain things where they've been abused or stuff. So, you know, get help soon, fast if necessary. It doesn't mean it's gonna be fast, working through abuse. It can take a long time, but consistently work on it. Don't just leave it fester.
And also, I think forgiveness is a big part to play in that, to forgive those who have abused you, because then you're free. There's an expression that I just love, but I'm not going to be able to remember it, but it's something about, don't let them have one more day of your, does anybody remember that expression when they talk about abuse? When someone's abused, don't give them one more day of all that frustration, right?
Yeah, and forgiveness is something that is very hard to do, especially if you've been abused, if you've been in an abusive relationship. Forgiveness is something that is very difficult to come across. And we want to emphasize again that seeking professional help is going to be a huge step towards kind of overcoming that and coming to the point where you're able to forgive.
There's one other thing that I'd like to bring up, and that's when husband and wife have a fight, and they're both too stubborn to say you're sorry, and it just, or the silent treatment, or there's all those horrible things. That needs to be worked on, because you've got to be able to come to the point of forgiving the other person, and you can't always be right. Sometimes you have to be wrong, right? So you have to admit it. Well, maybe you are right. And the other thing is, when you do say you're sorry, to really mean it, And there's so many fights that just get caused because different opinions or just silly stuff. After 3 days later, you think, why did I don't even remember what we thought about, right? Yeah. So some of those little things can really be unhealthy for your relationship.
Yeah, and one of the things, for example, I'll admit this, I have trouble saying sorry. That's one of my struggles. I have trouble admitting that I'm wrong because I love to be right.
Yeah, see?
Unfortunately, right?
I know quite a few men.
And so, yeah, I enjoy. We'll have a support group after church. If you have trouble saying sorry, join me. I'm not going to be leading out on that because I do not have the expertise to do that. But I just found it interesting that this week, actually, I was dealing at the school, and I regularly do some kind of counseling or hanging out with some of the students there that have trouble. And one of the students in elementary, he had kicked the ball at some people and had hurt them and had done so intentionally. And so I was kind of talking to him and working through that and kind of getting him to admit. And I was recognizing some of the things that I don't do necessarily when it comes to apologizing, and I made him apologize to every individual he injured. I made him first acknowledge that he was wrong. I made him acknowledge that he had done something wrong. I made him look into their eyes as they apologized and apologize, not just saying sorry, but apologize, acknowledging the hurt that this person had received as a result of their consequences.
He needs a sheet.
Yeah, he needs that sheet. Yeah, we have that. In our marriage, Alyssa and I are going through marriage counseling with James, and it's been tremendous. We have that 10 steps for conflict resolution, which has been incredibly helpful. But yeah, just for one problem, because we are a perfect couple. I'm just kidding. I'm joking. But yeah, a big part of kind of working through this forgiveness is asking sorry for someone or asking for forgiveness is not just saying sorry, but it's acknowledging the hurt that you've caused, acknowledging your part in the hurt, and looking them in the eye, and making that connection face to face, and making that apology is huge and crucial to the forgiveness aspect.
I think we should go to number 9 because it's quite a deep one.
Yeah, number 9, we'll have 2 more questions, and then we'll close here. Did God create men to have a much higher sexual drive than women, or did sin create the problem? And we kind of talked about how we're not really sure whether it's a result of sin or whether it's a result of God's creation, but we are aware of our present reality. that it tends to be a higher sex drive for men. And honestly, we really don't know whether it was a God-created thing or whether it was a sin-created thing. But the next question is very important. What if your husband's sex drive is higher than yours or way more than yours? Do you just do it for him even when you don't feel like it's a full soul experience? If you do this, this can sometimes cause resentment, but if you don't, are you opening up the door for him to be satisfied elsewhere?
That's that partnership thing again. It's that partnership again. If you're in communication and you can talk to each other freely about it, then there's got to be some kind of compromise that could come with it. So the resentment isn't, you see, that's the thing. It's all about open communication, because the resentment can be building up, and then there's little stupid fights because you're not really talking about the real issue. So I really think that men, if they really have that relationship with Christ plus the partnership with the wife, they should be able to talk about that quite freely and figure something out that makes them both happy.
Yeah, we also want to make it clear that if it has unfortunately been miscommunicated or any of the case, in our sermons or our approaches here, we have never once meant to say or never intended to say that women should give men sex whenever they want. That is not the case.
Right.
We are not saying that sex is something that must be met whenever a man so desires it. That's not what we're saying whatsoever. And again, when we talked about sex being reciprocal, sex being fulfilling, sex being romantic, it has to be a mutual submission to each other. It has to be a fully giving of oneself to the other partner. And sex can't be something that you just demand whenever you want or get whenever you want, because that is not a full soul experience. That's not what God intended for sex.
When my partner meets my needs, I'm willing to do anything to meet her needs. It needs to be very reciprocal and giving that way.
But what if she doesn't fulfill your needs? If
Then
you still give to her?
It's yes,
you
but
better
it's
say
also
yes.
about communicating that my needs aren't being met, right? So it's a very reciprocal thing. You need to compromise.
Yeah.
Will you always be in the mood? Not necessarily. But if you know that it brings your partner great joy, and if you know that they're willing to meet your needs, why wouldn't you? Would be the question I have to ask. You want to be very careful around this, and you want to communicate a lot about this.
Yeah.
We're not here to suggest doing something you don't like for the rest of your life. That's ridiculous. Of course, we wouldn't suggest that. But you definitely want to open up the dialogue and talk about your unmet needs with each other.
Yeah, because we don't want to. This is huge. Communication is the number one key to success in marriage. If you're not communicating your needs, if you're not communicating your unmet needs, then that opens up the door for you to try to find it elsewhere, right? And that doesn't mean that if women aren't satisfying their men, or if men aren't satisfying their women, that their spouse is going to find it elsewhere. What creates this problem is when you're not communicating your unsatisfaction, or you're not communicating where you're not satisfied with, where you're not communicating where you are satisfied with. When you have this communication, when you communicate with each other, then it prevents these walls from being built up.
Yes.
It prevents you from looking in other places. It prevents affairs from happening if you are honest and open with one another and you share your felt needs with the other. Right? And we want to jump to this next question.
Can I just in this time we're living, and I'm sure some of the men don't like some of that empowerment, but at least there's communication because they feel comfortable to talk. Yeah.
Yeah, what if I'm struggling with pornography? What do I do to get help? This isn't just a men's issue.
No.
The common misconception is that only men struggle with pornography, but that's not the case. Men and women both alike struggle with pornography, and you'd be surprised to hear the stats of how even it actually ends up being with
It's getting
with
more
the
even.
genders, that struggle with pornography. And We talk about, we said that the number one thing is communication, right? It's getting help. It's seeking professional help, whether it's pastoral help or whether it's counseling help. And if the pastors obviously do not have, most don't have counseling degrees, and so they may be able to counsel you on biblical matters, but may point you to a Christian counselor. But the important thing here is seeking help, is seeking someone else to help you.
There are groups in the city that have
Mhm.
sex addicts meetings. There's the 12-step meetings for sex addicts. There's all kinds of wonderful resources in our community. It's just to make that first step into that. And a lot of times, it's very hard to make that first step.
Yeah, how do I talk to my wife about my struggle with pornography? Well, again, we talk about open communication, right? It's a terrifying thing to talk to your spouse about your struggle with pornography, but it must be done because you cannot do this alone. I think one of the tricks that the devil uses to try to get us stuck into that rut is to try to get us to think that we can do it on our own. You cannot do it on your own. You cannot struggle on your own. You have to receive help. And what are some materials or study groups I could attend? I brought a couple of books that have been tremendously helpful as well. For example, this is by Bernie Anderson, Breaking the Silence. This is a story of an Adventist pastor who was struggling with pornography and kind of how it kind of almost ruined his relationship, almost destroyed his marriage, how his wife found out and all this other stuff. And so his struggle and his counseling to us as well. There's a couple of different series on this, but this is by Stephen Arterburn. Every Single Man's Battle. There's also Every Married Man's Battle, Every Man's Battle, Every Young Man's Battle. This is a fantastic resource as well on helping to overcome that addiction to pornography. Another one is Clean, A Proven Plan for Men Committed to Sexual Integrity by Douglas Weiss. Fantastic book. Yeah. And a new book as well by Ted Roberts is Pure Desires, another great resource to kind of combat that addiction to pornography. And there are different groups around the city. If you are looking to find a group, feel free to send me a message through Facebook or through email, because the first step is seeking help. The first step is admitting that you have a problem and seeking counseling and help to kind of address that problem, right?
And I just want to say, secrets in a marriage are very dangerous, and it's very destroying. It can destroy your marriage. So I think, when we go shopping and buy something maybe without checking with our budget, maybe that secret's okay, but for us ladies. But no, when you're having secrets between you, it really, something happens. It doesn't have to be spoken. You can feel it. There's something wrong. And it's really dangerous. So that's, again, communication.
Yeah, and we talked about as well, like if this really is a problem, you have to invest into fixing the problem. Whether it's investing time by receiving counseling, or it's investing in programs that'll help you. A great program that you can subscribe to is Covenant Eyes. It's a fantastic program that you can download onto your computer. It monitors your software, your entire internet browsing history, and if there is anything that is remotely close to kind of pornography or sexual addiction stuff, it'll send an email to your accountability partner, and it'll let them know that you've been viewing that, and they can connect with you and follow up with you, because having accountability partners is huge. Another thing that I've done in the past is I've had an accountability partner where we renew kind of our deals every once in a while. But for a whole month, my deal was if I ever view pornography on my device, I have to record a video of me smashing that device. Whatever device it was, whether it's my computer, my phone, my tablet, whatever it is, if I view pornography on any of these devices, I have to destroy it and send him a video of proof that I destroyed that device. And I do not want to destroy my device. Believe me, I do not want to spend thousands of dollars. Another thing that I do personally as well is I have a little app on my phone. It's called Shield, and it's a subscription app. I pay $3 a month to do that, but it's absolutely worth the small investment. $36 a year. That's all it takes, and it blocks my browser from viewing any other stuff. And another thing on top of that I do, because that you can turn that off anytime. But another thing I do on top of that is the restriction settings on my iPhone. For example, I turn the restrictions on, and I make it sure that no websites can access adult content. And then I don't have a password to that. I gave that phone to Alyssa. She set the password. Only she knows what the password is. And so, for example, if I'm ever looking up something that accidentally gets blocked, I have to see her before I can unlock it and view the content. And so this is a tremendous step. On all my devices, I have that only she has the password to, so that I cannot even remotely try to view anything pornographic or sexual without obviously her knowing, because she would have to have the password to unlock that. That's open communication. That's a huge thing.
Society's become very sexualized with the technology and with media. It talked about men's sex drives. Well, we're inundated from the day we're born with sexual images and what's on TV and movies. And so just recognize that you're in battle. You're in battle for your heart and for your soul and for your mind, and just hit your knees more often, communicate with God, talk about your desires, talk about your unmet needs, talk to your partner. Just constantly be seeking help. There are a lot of apps and a lot of good help out there.
Yeah, this is our final question we want to address, and it's kind of all culminating, connecting to this, is what if our sex has become boring to me? What if our sex has become boring?
Well, the world tells you all kinds of things.
I think your mic's off.
Yeah. The world's giving you all kinds of ideas, but we have to use our biblical principles to decide whether they're good or bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of healthy ways to make your marriage exciting. It doesn't have to turn to the secular world to come up with those ideas. A lot of those can be perverse. So you really want to find some new ways. There are great counselors that can help you through that. Honestly, I'd turn to good couples that you know of and say, hey, what do you guys do to keep things sort of exciting and alive? And there's great help out there.
Could you tell that story you told us about the woman that wanted the divorce?
Oh, the women that wanted a divorce. So
They told her what to do, go home and give 3 weeks or something.
So yeah, we'll just end with this then. There's a great story of a woman that found out her husband was having an affair. So he said, I'd like to have a divorce. She said that, yes, I'll grant you a divorce, but on one condition. For 1 month, I want you to treat me the day that you treated me when we were married. I want you to carry me through the door in your arms. And so for 1 month, he thought, well, I could probably handle that. So over the course of 1 month, every time they came home and they were going to go through the door, he picked her up and carried her through the door. At first, it was very distant and cold. This is ridiculous, but whatever. It's an easy request to fulfill. But over the course of the month, he slowly started to recognize that she was seeming a little bit more frail. He could feel her skin sometimes. He could see that she was getting a little bit older. He started to get closer and closer to the woman that he fell in love with. And so at the end of the month, he was coming home to let her know that he had ripped up the divorce papers. He was coming home to let her know that he wasn't going to go through with the divorce anymore. But what he found out was she had passed away. That unbeknownst to him, over the course of the last month, she had been diagnosed with cancer and was slowly dying. And that her strategy was that because their little child was watching how mommy and daddy were so in love for this last month, that the child was left with a great memory of how mommy and daddy loved each other. And I guess the moral of the story is take the time to appreciate each other. And I know we've repeated a lot of thoughts this morning, but love people around you, whether you're married or not. Love those around you and constantly look for ways to fall in love. This series has been fantastic, Abraham. I think it's been wonderful to see how you've tackled it and just shown us what biblical relationships can look like. So thank you.
Yeah, and you shared with us that's a true story.
Yeah.
Right? It's a true story that happened. And again, we want to emphasize this, that because we want to emphasize that sex isn't something dirty. It's something that we want to be able to have open communications about, because it's something that God instituted. It's something that God gave us. It's something that God instituted for our pleasure, for procreation, for all this other stuff. And so sex is an integral and important part of a marriage. And we also want to note that sex isn't something that just happens aside from marriage. It's not just this individual act. It is the culmination of emotions and connection. And so a big thing we counsel then when it comes to if your sex life is becoming dull or whatever the case is connect with each other, communicate with each other, reestablish that emotional connection, because again, spend time together, because sex isn't just an individual act. It is the culmination of the emotional relationship and connection that you have with one another. And if you work on that, then it's bound to improve tremendously. But we just want to thank you so much for joining us here for our panel of discussion. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful questions. We're sorry if we couldn't get to your questions in time. There are some very big questions that we wanted to get to, but we wouldn't be able to tackle in this time. We had to skip some of the questions even that we had already screened and come through for the sake of time. And so we just want to thank you so much for being here with us. And we just want to close this discussion here with a quick word of prayer. God, I want to thank you so much for being so tremendous, for giving us a community of wise counselors, for giving us godly people in our lives to guide us and to strengthen us and to strengthen our relationships. God, you have not created us to be alone. You've not created us to experience the loneliness. You've created us to be in a relationship with one another, whether that's a marital relationship or whether that's a marriage or a relationship in community with one another. You created us for a relationship, God. And you've also created sex for marriage, for this wonderful, intimate act of unity between a husband and a wife and two people that just love each other so deeply and tremendously. God, and I pray that you would bless every relationship here, that you would bless them with your spirit, that you would enter into their relationship and allow them to connect spiritually and emotionally and in every other way as well, God. We just pray for all of our relationships, that you would strengthen us and that you would not let the devil get in between these relationships because they're an important part. They paint an important picture of who you are, God. We thank you for your reckless love, for your love that knows no bounds, no limits, no boundaries, God. So we praise your name for all that you've done and for all that you've given us. Amen. And as we sing this final song.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me.
God, we thank you again for this day. Thank you again for your Sabbath. Thank you for this opportunity to get together and to see what you have to say about relationships, seek godly counsel, biblical counsel, and wise counsel, God. We just thank you so much for being here with us and for being in our relationships. Amen.
Thank you. So before we leave, I just want to announce a few upcoming things. You're welcome to be seated. So first off is our Young Adult Awesome Sabbath School, and basically if you're under the age of 35 to around 18 or something like that, you're welcome to come, and we try to have breakfast every week and just a great conversation. So I highly suggest that. And then also, we need some actors. There is an Easter drama coming up, and if you feel like you have a skill and a talent that you want to share, we definitely need you. So you can talk to Abraham or Taylor if you're interested. The third thing is we have Hebrews coming up, and that's where we meet together as a church at Third Space Coffee Shop, and that's going to be April 7th at 7:30, and there's always great coffee and then just lots of people to talk to, and it's a great way to meet your church family. The last thing is there's a women's connection group, and that's going to be in the fellowship room before church on March 24th, and Kathy is looking for an ant hill that's going to be part of that day. Ant farm. So if you have an ant farm or you know of someone who has one, you can talk to Kathy. So we hope that you come out and participate in all those things.
Yeah, I just want to leave you with this final benediction. May the God who blesses your relationships, may the God who loves you deeply and who enters into your marriage, may the God who blesses every aspect of it, from the wedding vows to the bedroom, may that God bless you and guide you, and may you have a wonderful rest of your week, wonderful rest of your Sabbath, and we want to thank you so much for joining us here for worship at Sun Valley. Amen.